Thanks very much, Will. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I have a couple of comments before happy to take any questions that you might have. So it's now been several days since anybody in this province has actually seen Doug Ford in public in terms of being available to the media, appearing in the legislature. This is, of course, aside from the very bizarre phone call that was apparently made to the European Union ambassador that Doug Ford posted about yesterday. We also know over the last couple of days, it's been very clear that there have been attempts by Doug Ford and his team to try to suspend or recess the legislature. When you take into account Doug Ford going completely invisible or becoming completely invisible since his disastrous press conference of last week, where he chose closing playgrounds and policing on carding instead of actually listening to his own science table, combined with the attempt to shut down the legislature, because he's clearly trying to avoid scrutiny. He's clearly trying to avoid accountability. He clearly doesn't want to have to deal with private members' legislation regarding paid sick leave, like the bill that Michael Coteau has brought forward, my colleague in the legislature, the Liberal MPP, Michael Coteau, regarding paid sick leave, which is scheduled to be debated this Thursday, and I sincerely hope will pass. All of this makes it quite clear that Doug Ford is scrambling. He is flailing because the way that he's gone about dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in the last few weeks, has been an unmitigated disaster. As I said yesterday, as I will continue to say, Doug Ford does not have the capacity to lead us through this crisis, this ordeal. We need real leadership. That's why I called last Thursday for the appointment of a COVID czar, a woman or man who would come forward with unimpeachable scientific integrity, who'd be able to lead this province through the balance of this pandemic and get us to the other side. I also want to acknowledge that just a little bit earlier this morning, we all heard in a public way from the Auditor General that she will, in fact, take the suggestion made by opposition parties to do a deeper dive into the Government of Ontario's and Doug Ford's prioritization for the vaccine rollout. You're all aware, I'm sure, of the challenges around which postal codes were included and what was behind the decision making. As I said, when the story first broke regarding the postal codes, it is really important for the credibility of the government, for the credibility of the vaccine rollout, to know exactly what kind of decision making went into this, to know whether or not politics played a role, and I sincerely hope that it did not, and to fully understand who gave the advice, who listened to the advice, and what kind of process Doug Ford put in place. Because we all saw after his announcement a number of days ago about hotspots and people being able to get vaccines, we saw complete chaos with thousands and thousands of appointments in places like Scarborough and elsewhere being canceled at the last minute. So I am very encouraged that the Auditor General has made the decision to take a deeper dive and a closer examination of that process. And I look forward to seeing what the results of her analysis are. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, a reminder to please write to the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom function if you have a question. And the first question is Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail.
Hi, Stephen.
Morning, Laura.
Can I get your reaction to Peel issuing a Section 22 today to close workplaces that have more than 5 cases that they suspect are linked to that place? What do you make of that? And do you think other municipalities such as Toronto should follow suit?
So first of all, I'm quite certain it wasn't an easy decision for Dr. Lowe to make. None of these decisions are easy. He is someone who has consistently followed the science, as have other colleagues of his, like Dr. Davila and others across the province. And so I do support the decision. I've been saying now for a number of days, politicians need to get out of the way. Doug Ford in particular needs to get out of the way. We do need to listen to the science. Obviously, we know consistently throughout this entire ordeal, Peel's been in really, really tough shape. I will say, if months ago, Doug Ford had listened to me and to the other opposition leaders, to mayors, to public health leaders like Dr. Lowe, and had introduced paid sick leave, I think we would be in much stronger shape right now. And a decision like this would probably not have been required. But Dr. Lowe is doing what he believes is necessary, following the science. He's on the ground there. I trust his judgment on this, and so I support his decision. Others of his colleagues, like Dr. Davila, I'm sure will reach their own conclusions. But I think, as I've said consistently, if the science is pointing in that direction, you got to follow the science.
Follow up.
And I mean, how much of this is on the federal Liberals for their paid sick leave program, which many have called a failure and inadequate? should they be making changes to it? And I guess what happens if and when these workplaces are dismissed and there is no paid sick leave for those employees at factories and whatnot?
Listen, let's be really clear about this. There was a paid sick leave program that the previous Liberal government had introduced in this province. It provided for 2 paid sick days. Not enough during a pandemic, but certainly far better than what we have right now. Doug Ford chose, for ideological reasons, I presume, back in 2018 to cancel this program. It's been about a year since I first started calling on Doug Ford to reintroduce paid sick leave, and everybody across the spectrum, not just politicians, mayors, public health leaders, his own science table, advocates, the essential workers themselves, everybody has been crying out for this program. So, at the end of the day, yes, there's a federal program. Yes, it provides a level of support. I don't think it's good enough during this crisis, but the responsibility for delivering on a program like this rests squarely and exclusively with Doug Ford. And here's the other thing. I have not heard at any point in the last year a single reasonable counter argument from Doug Ford about why he refuses to do this. It's always passing the buck. He's always blaming someone else. He's actually at some points blamed the workers themselves, suggesting that if he introduced this program, they might try to exploit it or take advantage of it. How callous do you have to be? How incompetent and negligent do you have to be in the midst of a public health crisis to make statements like that and try to blame everyone else instead of looking in the mirror? This goes right to the heart of the issue. Doug Ford is in way over his head. He does not have the capacity to get us through this. He is the wrong man in this job at a critically important time. It's why I believe he's got to go. And we do need to follow the science. We need a provincially funded paid sick leave program. If they pass Michael Coteau's legislation on Thursday, we'll get it. We'll get it right away. And that's what we need.
Okay, next question is Jessica Smith-Cross from Queen's Park Briefing.
Thanks so much. This is for one of my colleagues. I'm wondering if you think it's appropriate for the Premier to hold a $1,000 a head Zoom fundraiser in the middle of this crisis, and what does that say about his judgment?
I think it's just another one in a long line of very questionable things that he's chosen to do in the midst of such an incredibly, what should be an all-consuming crisis. In the last 3 or 4 days, we've heard through media reports about big changes in his office in terms of staffing, whether or not there might be a cabinet shuffle coming up. Now you're talking about partisan fundraising that they happen to be doing in this moment. This really speaks again to the crux of why Doug Ford has to go. Misplaced values, misplaced priorities. There should only be one thing he's focused on right now, 24 hours a day, listening to the science table, listening to the scientists, working exclusively on you and I, the people of Ontario, not his own narrow partisan political interests. So this is now, it's farcical. This has now reached the level of farce, except it's not funny. It's life and death for the people of Ontario, for far too many people in Ontario. So again, I'm going to repeat, Doug Ford doesn't have the capacity to lead this province in this crisis in particular. That's why I believe he's got to go. I think people in his own party realize he's the wrong person for this job at this moment in time. And he shouldn't be doing this kind of fundraising during this particular moment of this crisis.
Follow up?
Yeah, my follow-up will be on paid sick leave. I'm going to read to you a quote that was part of the finance minister's press release in response to the federal budget yesterday. Okay. So he says, "We also need to protect essential workers who need to keep working during this crisis. For months, Ontario has been advocating for improvements to the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit to protect their health and that of their coworkers. When they're ill or worried they may have COVID-19, workers need to know that they have immediate access to this program." So I was wondering if you think that is an evolution of their thinking on paid sick days. Does that give you any hope? What does this change?
I mean, to me, it changes nothing. Doug Ford has had months to put this together. He had a budget back in November. He had a budget just a few weeks ago. Plenty of opportunities to do the right thing. If he'd stepped to the microphone last Friday and had said to the people of Ontario, "I apologize. I have been wrong. It's taken me way too long to deliver this. We're going to have paid sick leave. I'm going to move heaven and earth to make this real for you." Instead of deciding to trample on our civil liberties with police carding, and to close playgrounds, which again made no sense whatsoever to anybody, including his own science table. If he had just acknowledged that he'd gotten it wrong and was prepared to do the right thing, just imagine what kind of relief that would have provided to the people of Ontario who are thirsting. They are hungry for that kind of leadership that's self-aware and that is actually competent. But that's not what we got. And again, now we're hearing, you mentioned the fundraising, now we're hearing about all of these other things that they're so much focused on their own, saving their own skin, like the political stuff, which is just absurd to me. So look, what the finance minister, what Doug Ford should be saying right now is, we know that the federal government has done virtually all the heavy lifting during this pandemic to help support Ontario families. So we're going to do our part. We're going to step up with a pandemic-related, provincially paid for sick leave program. We're going to support the private members' bills brought forward by opposition parties in the legislature. We're going to collaborate and we're going to figure this out. And instead, what we got is the typical pushback, the typical passing the buck and saying it's someone else's responsibility. It's completely absurd at this point.
Okay, next question is Colin DeMello from CTV Toronto.
Hey, good morning, Stephen. I'm wondering if you're okay with this being just a time-limited measure, whether this is only necessary for, let's say, 2021 versus a permanent entitlement that employees would have.
On the paid sick leave? I'm assuming you mean paid sick leave. Listen, I think
Yes.
okay, great. So look, I think that the immediate urgent need we have is to get to the other side of this pandemic, which we all hope will be sometime this calendar year. So the provincially funded 10 paid sick days that we are calling for in Michael Coteau's bill, to me, that's a measure that's required to deal with this immediate moment that we're in, which again, we all hope will expire. We'll get to the end of this pandemic at some point this calendar year. I think there does definitely need to be a much bigger conversation around issues like paid sick leave. Again, I was proud to be part of a government that delivered a promising start in that regard prior to 2018 with 2 paid sick days. I think we have to find a way to make sure it's a balanced approach. We do know that especially the small business entrepreneurs we have in this province have been extraordinarily battered during this pandemic. And so I do think there is definitely a need for a better social safety net, including paid sick leave. On the other side of the pandemic, if I'm elected premier next year, I will engage in that conversation. I'll want to make sure every participant in our economy is at the table to get it right. But in the meantime, until we get the all clear from the science table that we are truly through this pandemic and we've reached herd immunity, we need a provincially funded paid sick leave program that makes it easy and seamless for any worker in this province who is feeling sick or might have COVID symptoms to be able to stay at home while they're still able to support their family and pay their bills. It's the very least and decent thing that a government should be doing, except Doug Ford refuses to do it.
Okay, Colin has no follow-up and there are no other questions on the line. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone.